Very special thanks, of course, to Cars of Somerset for providing the Touareg in this review, and if you catch this video as soon as it's released, pretty much, you may even be able to still buy this car, but if it is already gone, you can click the link down in the description and check out the current stock page on their website, or even commission them to find you a car if this one has already sold and you're still in the market for one. Those of you who have been following this channel for some time will doubtless know that I have a lot of love for the Touareg, so the bar for my expectations on a newer one are fairly high. Now that will be tempered, of course, by the fact that this is, for example, a black edition, so it's not designed to be the top of the range in terms of performance, but just in general, I have so much love for the Touareg that this one, well, it's a car that I want to succeed, but also because I already have so much love, the risk is there that it could let me down. So does it? Does this feel like both an authentic evolution of the Touareg and what was already great about it, but also can it stand on its own four wheels as a new model? Well, put simply, yes. Pretty much yes to both. It can. I love it as an existing fan, but for very different reasons in some cases to that original, but at the same time, I'm really happy that Volkswagen carried over, and I'm sure very deliberately so, the core values of pretty much why I love the Touareg already, and that is that the Touareg is one of those relatively rare SUVs which has the ability of a top-class contender of its time, but doesn't really shout about it. I would describe the Touareg as a modest SUV. It has the kind of kit, style, finish, certainly comfort, ride quality, etc. that you would expect from an Audi, Porsche, Range Rover, Mercedes, but it doesn't have that kind of associated branding, sometimes the associated pricing, and even sometimes the running costs. At the same time, the Touareg always aims, kind of like comparing a general practitioner doctor to a specialist. A specialist is essentially like one of the best in one specific way, whereas a GP, well, that doctor knows a good amount about a ton of different things. That to me is what the Touareg is like. It's not aiming to be the absolute best at anything, but it's really good at everything you need it to do. So off-road, it's good. Space is good, but it's not obscenely big and it's not uncomfortable on-road. The performance, for example, on the R model with 456 horsepower, 516 pound-feet of torque from a hybrid system with a 3-litre diesel and an electric motor is really fast. 5 seconds to 60 is a vast improvement over that first generation Touareg, for example. But again, it's not necessarily even trying to be anywhere near the fastest SUV around. Even though, considering Volkswagen has at least partial say in what Porsche and Audi are doing with their SUVs, well, those are some of the fastest SUVs around, especially in the case of Porsche. So Volkswagen clearly has the team to make the Touareg that level if they wanted to, but they chose not to. And that's something which is carried over through everything about the Touareg. It's big enough to have a huge amount of space inside. And the first gen already had great space, but this one is even bigger inside. But from the outside, it's not obscenely big. It's considerably smaller, for example, than a Range Rover. But at the same time, it's more than big enough to be certainly a family car. The trunk is massive, the seat space is excellent, the headroom, of course, is fantastic. The interior design is easily one of the best points about the car. And as any of you know, that's pretty important to me because the way I see it, you're inside the car, so it may as well be a nice place to be, and Volkswagen put a huge amount of effort into the way this car looks inside. It's got that big touch screen, it's a very pleasant place to be. The way everything feels as well is nice. It has almost more of what I'd expect from a Mercedes level of style and feel, but again, for a Volkswagen price. But to briefly go back to that point of performance, at least on the example of this particular black edition, to highlight the point of what I'm saying, it's impressive because this one isn't even trying to be fast per se, but with this 282 horsepower from the same 3-litre diesel engine but without the motors, and 443 pound-feet of torque, which is still very healthy, this version can already do 0 to 60 in barely over 6 seconds. So it's genuinely quick. In fact, this is quicker, significantly quicker in fact, than the Touareg V10 was. And it's not too far behind the W12 with the 6-litre engine in the older Touareg. So this one's not even the highest grade, and it's that much quicker than you'd expect it to be, all the while getting between like 35 and 45 miles per gallon. That's pretty great stuff, and of course you would hope for that kind of improvement over time, but it's nice to know that it is there. Now, some people like to go on about, the diesel scandals, and that didn't just affect Volkswagen, it was Mercedes as well, and a number of different brands. I couldn't really care less at this point, to be honest. To me, this proves what the car's capable of. The performance is great. One of my favourite things in it is when you feel and hear, in the case of this one, those turbos spool up and give you that huge shove of torque. It may not be an R, but it certainly isn't slow, that's for sure. It's more than fast enough to get out of most situations and surprise some boy racers, that's for sure. In terms of the daily use, I could easily see somebody having this car and keeping it for many years as their daily driver, and probably never wanting to change it, in fact. It's a very, what I would call, livable car. Even though for me I tend to go for the higher performance models, for somebody like me who does choose more often than not the fast version of any particular vehicle, well, even for me this was great. It was a lovely place to be. It's extremely comfortable, thanks to the air suspension, which again is carried over from the older days of the Touareg. It was one of my favourite things about mine. It is a supremely comfortable car, and because of the fact that, once again, it has that VW badge on the front, it severely undercuts many of its rivals on price. This one brand new is 70 grand, but you can already buy a 2020 car such as this one for like 45 to 50 grand. So again, it undercuts your equivalent capability of Range Rover or Mercedes, for example. You don't necessarily get that level of badge panache, but if you're in the market for something like a Touareg, chances are you actually value a car that's genuinely good rather than just trying to look like it's good. And that's kind of the whole point of the Touareg. Now, the older Touaregs have a number of horror stories around them, especially mine with the V10 engine. You have to take the engine out to do anything. Well, in my experience, it was a great car. It had some issues, but for the most part, it was fantastic. And the major issue that I had with it was day one, and then after that, it was pretty much great beyond essential maintenance. That was a much older car, so this, if you buy it new, you've got a warranty anyway. A lot of those things are cancelled out, at least for the next few years. Across the board, I think this is a deeply capable car, and a very impressive one. If I was going to buy more of a family-oriented SUV, well, for me, it would probably be this, because of my existing love for it, and the fact that it both holds true to those values that the original had, but makes so many beneficial updates. The space is even better, the looks are more space age, the interior is stunning and very useful as well. It's not just about looking good, and everything about the experience of driving the car as well is pleasant. It's a lovely car to work with. It's not the fastest thing around, but it's quick. It's not the biggest thing around, but it's got tons of space. It's not necessarily the most badge panache, but it still looks great, has tons of style, and is futuristic inside and out. And to me, the real key of if the Touareg is the right SUV for you can be kind of answered based on one core question. And that core question is one of the things that I mentioned, but it's one of the things that I've always loved about it. And that is the super specific size range that they decided to make this SUV. The Touareg is tall, it's wide, but it's not overly long. And that gives it so many advantages and abilities that, for instance, some super long or super tall SUV like a Q7, like a Range Rover, wouldn't necessarily have as much of. This, for example, feels more planted through corners because of how wide it is, but it's not overly tall. It feels sure-footed, just like the older one did. If you need 7 seats, of course it's not the car for you, but if you need 5 and a massive trunk, well, again, it's got that kind of interior size without being ridiculously big from the outside. It's no Hummer, that's for sure. Ultimately, my verdict on this latest iteration of the Touareg is that I'm really happy with how Volkswagen handled it. I think that they could have easily fallen into a number of pitfalls, which they didn't. It holds true to a lot of the values that the older car has, and a lot of the values that I love it for to this day. And as an existing fan of the old school way of doing it, well, it's often difficult to please those kind of purists or old school fans. So the fact that this one does, as an existing fan, still appeal to a lot of the things that I loved and in many ways improve over the old car, Well, that says a lot. I think it's a fantastic choice of SUV, and as I said, if I was going to choose one not just for performance but more just as a practical daily, well then the Touareg would at the very least be high on my list, if not the top of it. But overall, that's it for this review. Of course, if you want to hear my thoughts on my Touareg, and I've done a number of different videos about that V10, then of course you can click around on the channel and find that, including here on screen. And until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.